All right, seventh graders. So I have to tell you, this is my favorite chapter out of all of the chapters that we do. Chapter 2%. It has so many applicable lessons that you can use outside of the classroom. And so I'm super excited. It does take us a while to do this chapter, but that's okay. It's definitely worth it. We're going to be looking at if you look in the top right corner of your screen right now, it says essential question. And so in this chapter, what we're looking at is how can percent help you understand situations involving money. And so we'll start the chapter. The first few lessons are the lessons that we need to help us solve and eventually find and figure out how we use percent in situations involving money. That really comes at the end of the chapter. So this first part of the chapter is a lot of pre-work, the math work, the understanding of how things are set up for us to actually then eventually understand situations involving money. So we're going to start in lesson 1 today, which is percent of a number. And our learning target is I can find a percent of a number. So what does that mean? So this is also something, this lesson 1, that you learned a little bit in 6th grade. So hopefully as I start to go through some of the examples, it starts to look a little familiar to you. With percents, some of the background knowledge that we need to have is definitely understand, how do you get from a percent to a decimal to a fraction? And also the other way around. How do you get from a fraction to a decimal to a percent? And so that's some background knowledge, like I said, that you should have. So we're going to actually start this introduction, this real world link, with looking at that. And so this is page 103. And so let's take a look. So some students are collecting money for a local pet shelter. The model shows that they have raised 60% of their $2,000 goal, or $1,200. So if you actually look at the graphic that's here, you'll see Fido's bones here. You'll see it goes all the way up to 60%. And again, it's telling you they've raised so far $1,200, which is 60% of their $2,000 goal that they're trying to achieve. So let's take a look here at this chart on understanding going from this percent that we know to what it looks like as a decimal and to what it looks like as a fraction. And then this will apply to what we do in the lesson today. So 80%. Now think back. How do you make that percent a decimal? You have to move the decimal so many places. Do you go to the left or do you go to the right? Well, remember that decimal is always at the end on the right, and you're going to move it 2 places to the left to create that decimal. So 80% is 0.80 or 0.80 or 80 hundredths. So as a fraction, how does that look? All of your percentages are out of 100%, right? So I'm going to start with that initial fraction, 80% out of 100. Well, you know that can be reduced. You know that you can simplify that fraction down. So my little trick here is if I see in the numerator and the denominator there's a 0, I can cancel those out. That's essentially dividing by 10. And so when you do that, you're saying if I divide both of those by 10, that means that this is going to reduce to 8 over 10. But you can still simplify that further. Those are even numbers, right? So you can cut those in half. Half of 8 is 4. Half of 10 is 5. That's as simplified as I can get. So 80% is the same thing as 4/5 as a fraction. All right, the 60%, this $1,200 that they've raised so far. Again, think about moving that decimal 2 places to the left. So that decimal becomes 0. Oops, too much there. 0.60 or 60 hundredths. As a fraction, we're going to take that 60 put it over 100% out of 100%. So again, you see a 0 in the numerator and the denominator. So think about dividing by 10. So I'm going to cancel those out. And if I divide by 10, that means that gives me 6, because 60 divided by 10 is 6. 100 divided by 10 is 10. 6/10. Those are also even numbers that you can cut in half. Half of 6 is 3. Half of 10 is 5. So 60% or 60 hundredths is the same thing as 3/5. 40%, 0.40, 40 hundredths. As a fraction, 40 out of 100. I'm going to divide by 10. So if I divide by 10, 40 divided by 10 gives me 4. 100 divided by 10 gives me 10. Again, cut those in half. Half of 4 is 2. Half of 10 is 5. 40% is the same thing as 40 hundredths and the same thing as 2/5. Last one, 20%. 0.20, 20 hundredths. As a fraction, we're looking at 20 over 100. And it's already been reduced here for you, which makes sense. It's saying it's 1/5. Because if I divide by 10, that means I get 2/10, which then simplifies to 1/5. So 20% is the same thing as 20 hundredths, and it's the same thing as 1/5. So just that background knowledge, just that reminder on how those percents, decimals, and fractions interchange with each other. So down here at number 2, it says use the model that we just did to write 2 multiplication sentences that are equivalent to 60% of 2,000 equals 1,200. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit. We're going to come back to this. And the top of page 96, I'm sorry, not 96, 104. Sorry about that, 104. It says find the percent of a number. So it's telling you if you're going to find the percent of a number, such as 60% of 2,000, you can use either of the following methods. You can write the percent as a fraction and then multiply, or you can write the percent as a decimal and then multiply. Well, that's what we're going to do. We're going to come back up here and let's start talking about writing the percent as a fraction and then multiply. So one of the ways that we can do it is 60% of 2,000. So if I come back up, right, 60% is always out of 100%. Your percentages are always out of 100. So I'm going to start with 60 over 100. Now, let's see. Let me use yellow here. If you remember what the word of means, think about that. What math operation does of, that keyword, indicate? Add, subtract, multiply, divide. Hopefully, you're saying multiplication. So of means to multiply, so times. And then we're trying to find 60% of 2,000, of 2,000 times 2,000. That's one way to show a multiplication sentence to help us find that it would equal 1,200. A second way, okay? So one of the ways is using a fraction to solve and find percent of a number. A second way is you can use a decimal. So remember up here, we were doing these decimal and fraction equivalents. 60% as a decimal is 0.60 or 60 hundredths times of, right? We're still using 60% of 2,000 times 2,000. Both of those models are ways that you can find 60% of 2,000 using the fraction or using the decimal. So we're going to explore this a little bit more on this next page. So let's keep looking. So we're going to now again go back to page 104. And we're going to go down to the got it's. Now, one thing with the book sometimes is it gives you fairly limited space. I'll do what I can. I'm going to use this note section on the left-hand side. If you find that you're running out of room, you can write really anywhere on this page that makes sense to you or get lined paper. It's harder for me with this pad that I'm using to do the math work with you right now to save space. I will do it, like I said, I'll do what I can. But if you feel like you need it, take out an extra sheet, use the other space provided that you need to on the book. All right, so let's look at finding the percent of each number. Let's try letter A together to start with. So I'm going to come up here. Whoops. And let's set this up. And I'm going to show both ways that we just talked about. Okay, so first way. Let's do it as a fraction. We're going to find this 40% of 70. 40% of 70. So we know if we set it up as a fraction, we're going to do 40% out of 100%. 40% out of 100 of times 70. So we're going to work this one out first. So since we're doing this as a fraction to begin with, what I'm going to do is put this over 1, just like that. And then I'm going to take a look at that fraction and think about how I can reduce this. Because right now, if I were to multiply this fraction across, numerator and denominator, you'd have a really large number. So let's simplify this list a little bit first. So you're going to see me, I'm going to cross reduce right now. So when you did multiplication of fractions, you should always know that you can ahead of time, to make it easier, cross reduce. Now, if I look at 70 and 100 across like this, I see I can divide by 10. If I do 70 divided by 10, I'm going to get 7. If I do 100 divided by 10, I'm going to get 10. I can't cross reduce in the other direction from 40 and 1, and that's okay. So let's see what we get. 40 times 7, and this is where if you need to, you can absolutely use your calculator. You have it for you to go through this process if you need it. This is going to give you 280 in my numerator. In my denominator, if I do 10 times 1, I get 10. Okay, so remember I said if there's a 0 in the numerator and denominator like that, you could divide that by 10. I'm going to cancel that out. So if I did 280 divided by 10, I'm getting 28. And then 10 divided by 10 is 1. So what I'm seeing is that 40% of 70 is 28. That's one way to do it. Let's try the second way. So I'm going to write or. Let's do the decimal. So if I do the decimal, I'm going to take 0.40, 40 hundredths, times, and remember we're doing 40% of 70, times 70. Pick up your calculator and multiply that out. Type it exactly how you see it. 0.40 times 70. And look and see what you get. Oops. You should see that you are getting also 28. So whether you take and multiply the fraction form of the percent, or you take the decimal form and you multiply it, either way, both methods are going to give you that answer. 28 is 40% of 70. 28. Okay, let's try letter B. 15% of 100. So I'm going to show both methods again. So I'm going to come back over here on my notes side. 15% of 100. So let's start with the fraction. 15 out of 100, 15% out of 100, of times 100. What do you notice about this problem? 15% of 100. Are you seeing it yet? Well, if it's out of 100, shouldn't it just be 15? And honestly, you really don't need to do the work here. I mean, if you think about it, if you really want to do the work and you want to see what it looks like, those 100s would cross out. They would cancel each other out to ones. And all you have left is 15. 15% of 100. 15% of 100 is 15. And if you really want to check again, okay, so if you really want to try it with the decimal, you can do 0.15 times 100. And what do you get? So try it. Type it in. You should also see 15. So since it's out of 100, it's just that value. So 15% of 100 is 15. That's one of those, when you see it, as you get used to these problems, or if it's looking familiar already to you, that would be a problem where you just use some common sense. And so, in some types of those situations, you don't necessarily have to show the work, but sometimes it's okay if you do, if you don't see it. So either way is fine. Mental math, I guess, is the other word I'm looking for letter B. Okay, letter C. So 55% of 160. So when we get more comfortable with doing percent of a number, what I want you to start to see is I want you to think about the problem itself. 55% of 160. So I want you to think about, what is 50% of 160? Think about that for a minute. What's half of 160? Wouldn't that be 80? So 50% of 160 is 80. Now I need 55%, but you can use this as kind of a guide. So if you're looking for 5% more, 55%, not 50, but 55, your answer is going to be just a little bit over 80, okay? So use that as a guide, like I said, and a way to check your answer. So when we go now through and calculate this, let's see how close we are to 80, how much just a little bit over we are from that number. Okay, so let me erase that. Keep that in the back of your mind. And let's take a look. So letter C. So I'm going to do these methods right under here. So let's look at the fraction. 55% out of 100% times 160. I'm going to put it over 1, right? I'm going to think about multiplying fractions. Okay, so I'm going to reduce. I'm going to divide by 10. That's the first thing I see when I cross reduce here. So if I did 100 divided by 10, it's going to give me 10. If I do 160 divided by 10, that's going to give me 16. Now, if I keep looking at that, those are evens. I can actually still reduce that a little bit further. If I do half of 10, I get 5. If I do half of 16, I get 8. So now I'm good. I can't reduce it anymore. So if I think about what I have 55 times 8, so I'm going to multiply that out. And I'm going to get 440. And if I do 5 times 1, I have 5. Well, I can still simplify this, okay? I'm going to do 440 divided by 5. And I'm going to see that I get 88. So it's saying 55% of 160 is 88. Okay, let's try the decimal form of it one more time. Underneath, let's do the or. Let's check it out this way. 0.55 times 160, right? And on this one, just use your calculator. So if you use your calculator and check it that way, what do you see? Hopefully you see the same answer. Hopefully you're seeing 88. And so remember we just said a few minutes ago that 50% of 160 was 80. And we said if it's 55%, it's just going to be a little bit over 80. And we're getting 88. And that makes sense. That answer makes sense with that problem, 88. Okay, let's try one more here, and then I'm going to have you try a couple. So let's look at letter D. 75% of 280. So let's take a look at the fraction form of it first. So let's do 75% out of 100% times 280. And like I said, I'm going to make this over 1 so it becomes a multiplying fraction problem. Think about simplifying, right? So if I cross reduce here, I can divide by 10. 100 divided by 10 is 10. 280 divided by 10 is 28. I can still reduce these and cut these in half. I've got evens here. Half of 28 is 14. Half of 10 is 5. That's all I can reduce it, right? So now I'm going to multiply my numerator. I'm going to do 75 times 14. I'm going to get 1,050. And then 5 times 1 in the denominator here, 5. Okay, last step. You got to simplify that still. That fraction can divide out. So 1,050 divided by 5 is 210. Put that up here. Well, yeah. So that's saying that 75% of 280 is 210. Okay, let's check the decimal form of it. So 0.75, my goodness, I'm getting a little messy, sorry. Let's try that again, times 280. All right, so this one, like I said, you could use your calculator, you can multiply it right out. And you should also see here that you get an answer of 210. So 75%, 3/4 of 280 of that value is 210. So now that I've gone through 4 and I've shown you 2 methods on those, what I'm going to have you try for the end of the lesson today is you're going to go to guided practice. And guided practice on page 106, I'm going to have you try right now, number 1, number 2, and then I want you to think about number 5 down here. So try those. You're going to pause the video like we've done in the past, and then we'll come back and you can check your answers. Okay, so I think I might have circled number 3 when I told you what problems to do. I apologize. Made 1 and 2, so I hope you caught that. 1 and 2, and then 5. So here's your answers for 1 and 2. Number 1, 8% of 50. That's a very small percentage of that number, very small percentage. So you are definitely looking at an answer in the single digits there, and you should have gotten 4. And I showed both methods again on how to do it. Number 2, 95% of 40, that's almost 100% of that number. So that means if it's almost 100% of 40, you have a value very close to 40. You're 95% of it. You're almost there. So you should have gotten 38, and that makes sense. 38 is 95% of 40. It's very close to 40 because it's almost all of that number. And so number 5, here's what I wrote down and came up with. And you may have come up with some different examples. So thinking about situations and where you find and where you use percent of a number or just percents. Sales tax, right? So we live in Michigan and sales tax is 6% here. So you'll see that as you purchase items. Discounts at a store. So when you're shopping online or you're shopping in an actual store and you're looking at something that's 25% off, 50% off, 10% off. Interest in a savings account. So if you have a savings account, if you know you do, your savings account earns some type of a percentage of interest each month. And then tips in restaurants, like if you go out to dinner, and it's more of not your fast food restaurants, but more of your sit down restaurants, where you're with your family, and maybe you see and you notice whoever you're with is paying the bill and they're also leaving a tip. Possibly there's a percentage of a tip that you can leave your server. And there's other examples as well, like I use percents in grading. So in the grade book, and how we weight your assignments and your tests. And so there's lots of different examples and ways that you can use percents outside of the classroom and in real life situations. So I'm going to stop the lesson today. If you have time, then you're starting to get into ALEKS, and I will see you tomorrow. We'll finish lesson 1 tomorrow and do some more examples of one of the ones that we just didn't get to today. So have a great day.